Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here in the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, back again to talk about everything basketball with you in the association and in college, Brice Lewis. We have another good show for you today. Guys, we're going to talk about why I think the long layoff for teams that didn't go to the bubble, then obviously we know the layoff before the bubble, and then the 2-3 months, depending on when you were eliminated from the bubble, how that has affected this NBA season. I'm going to give my thoughts. I'm going to try to bring you into my where I'm thinking, what I'm trying to put out into the universe, I guess I could say. I'm going to try to talk about that today. To start the show, we're also going to talk about some performances. We're going to talk about the Nets. Nets have some major issues that I've noticed watching the Hawks, them play against the Hawks, watching them lose to Washington. We're going to talk about that. We're going to also talk about Jaylen Brown. He's having a great start to his season. Tatum, we know, is the undisputed star of that team, but Jaylen Brown seems like he's taking this game to another level, especially with Gordon Hayward out or not with the team anymore, now currently in Charlotte. And we're going to talk about other NBA news and topics throughout the show. So definitely thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast. And we're going to go ahead and always try. Actually, we're going to have another good show today. So, like I said, thank you for tuning in. So, let me go ahead, before I get into the main meat of what I'm going to talk about here in the first segment, I just remind you guys, don't forget to follow us at GSMC_basketball on Twitter, as you can keep up with us and talk about and interact with us about everything that's happening in the world of basketball. We update highlights in today's news. We talk about current highlights, news, results, players, things of that nature, and we love to hear from you guys, because without you guys, there would be no GSMC. But now let me go ahead and get into it right here. So, as we know, if you played in the bubble, the earliest you would have been eliminated would be early August, right? Around that time. And everything, right? August, September, depending on when you got eliminated in the playoffs, regular season, any of those. So, one thing I think is interesting is, what about the teams that never made it to the bubble and basically have been off since March? I feel like that has benefited certain teams like Cleveland, like Atlanta. That's why they're starting off really good so far to start this young season, because you got to think about it. The young players, both of these teams have a lot of young players on the team. And what is one thing as a young player always looking to if you really care about trying to be better, is improving your game. Every offseason, every player, you would think, if they want to be better, improves their game. It's something that what we criticize Andrew Wiggins about, because we think it doesn't seem like he improves year to year. It just feels like he's the exact same player previously, and him being the exact same player is he'll have a night where it looks like he could be a star, and he'll have a night where he doesn't look like he belongs in the NBA. He's not consistent. He doesn't seem like his shot hasn't improved. Not a lot has improved in his game since he's came into the league. But if you look at Cleveland and Atlanta, you got to think about it. Atlanta has Cam Reddish in his second year, DeAndre Hunter in his second year, Kevin Huerter in his third year, John Collins in his third year, actually his fourth year. You know, Trey, we know what Trey is. Trey's a walking bucket. But they had a lot of young players who basically didn't play for a very long time and was developing. And you can clearly see by how Atlanta started the season, the way that all their young players have looked. They've improved. They definitely worked on their game during that time off. They just haven't been able to play live basketball to actually show it. Same thing with Cleveland. Darius Garland and Colin Sexton look like now one of the better backcourts in the entire NBA because of how they've played. They're the reason why Cavaliers have got off to such a great start. Because remember, you thought a team like the Cavaliers probably going to be 1-5, 1-6 maybe to start the year. But they're 4-2, and now it looks like they have two young budding stars in the backcourt. Now everybody's looking for a nickname for him. So clearly, as you can tell, those teams and those players really took the time to work on their game, to improve their game. Because like I said, you have all that time between the last game, which was stopped by the pandemic, and then now to start the season, you have so much time to just work on your game, improve flaws in your game. And like I said, the only thing you didn't have is the ability to actually go out and actually play in live games to see the results in live games. And now you're seeing it. And then you got to think about teams who got eliminated in the bubble early. You know, a team that's surprising me is the Orlando Magic. Because remember, they were eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. So they were eliminated around September, close to September, or in September. And so now they only had 3 months before they had to rear it back up. But Markelle Fultz showed flashes at the end of last year of him improving, but now it looks like he's even improved even more in just 3 months. That Markelle Fultz come out of the bubble and just start working on his game. Remember, those guys had 5 months off before that. Orlando basically played a maximum of, if we don't count the expedition games, they played a maximum of 13 games. Because they had 8 regular play like seeding games, and then they had 5 playoff games because they had a 5-game series. They played 13 games. And you just came off about a 4-5 month layoff. Now you get another 3 months. Markelle Fultz clearly, from the end of the pandemic, improved his game going into the bubble. And then from the bubble, improved his game going into the regular season. And so my point I'm trying to make here is that this might cause some differentiating in the standings, because that's why you've seen teams like Milwaukee who played late, or teams like Brooklyn and the teams that we consider the best teams, not at least starting out, aren't playing the way maybe we thought they would play at this point, even though they're the better, more talented teams. Because remember, these guys just recently, when Giannis got out of the bubble, he went home, spent time with his family. We obviously know about the discussion he had with the co-owner, then went to Greece for vacation. So it's not like we have account of the Giannis and the Bucks working out. I'm sure they worked out. I'm sure they tried to, get them to keep themselves in shape, but they didn't have a lot of time in between the next start of the season, and you also want to rest your body. So that's why it may take a while for the teams that we consider to be the better teams to maybe get their footing, and then, I think the standings will fill out the way we expected it to fill out, but there may still be a surprise team in there. You can maybe see it also with the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat are the exact, really outside of a couple of additions like Jay Crowder not there, most of the guys, the core guys of last year's team is back in Miami. But you see Miami's not starting off the season as well. Remember, they played in October. That was the last time they played. They only had 2 months in a couple of weeks before they had to start playing again. We know Jimmy Butler was back in the gym, but realistically, how many of the guys in the Miami Heat were able to really get into the gym, work on their games? Because you just came out of a long bubble stretch. You played till the finals, till Game 6. You want to give your body to rest. And then we don't know if that short layoff is going to affect them with fatigue for the season and etc. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if Miami isn't even a top 4 seed. And maybe they're even fighting just to get into the playoffs because of the circumstances. And then with the Hawks and Cleveland looking good so far, we'll see if one of those teams, start to, I guess, fall off a little bit. But right now, if they continue on this perspective, and Orlando's playing really good, you really got maybe potentially 2 new playoff teams. Because it also goes into the Raptors. But I'll discuss the Raptors a little bit more later on. But as you can tell, my point is that the long layoff has helped certain players. You can tell which players during these layoffs have worked on their games and tried to get better because they want to be better. Think about it. Denver just came off a Game 5 in the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers. Lose Jeremy Grant to Detroit. Now Michael Porter Jr. has to be a third guy, and he looks better in just 2 months. Again, 2 months. He had closer to 3. Because I'm sure he took the time to, relax, get himself right, whatever. But he knew, okay, especially when Grant signed, I'm the guy. I'm the third guy. And yeah, Denver hasn't looked as good, and that was to be expected. They lost some guys. I mean, listen, there's guys who lost some guys. Teams are still trying to get their rhythm and chemistry down. It's early in the season, playing a lot of games. You're going to see that. But I definitely look at everything that's happening and say to myself, you could really tell who took advantage of that time to really work and become better. I like to say, think about the rookies this year. Remember, college basketball basically stopped last year. It stopped. It stopped when Zion came to the league. They didn't have the ability like other people. Because remember, Zion never played. And so, a lot of the rookies in this year's draft, actually, Zion did play. Sorry, it's not Zion's year. This past year, you saw a lot of rookies, they haven't played, even in college basketball, in so long. And now, without really a combine, without much camp, have to come right into the NBA season being drafted by their teams and play immediately. But at the same time, again, it probably applies for them as well. They were able to work on their game. They were able to improve. Look at what are scouts saying I'm bad at. Instead of having, after the college basketball season, work on your game all the way up to the draft, they were able to start working on it beforehand. And so they had a couple more months to go ahead and try to work on stuff. That's why, to me, I said a lot of people were saying this draft's one of the worst drafts, but we've seen some rookies who have played well so far this year for that particular reason. Because they've had a lot of time to really try to work on what people said they weren't good at. And remember, teams are evaluating you, even though they do evaluate you in workouts. They sometimes look at it like, well, he's not playing live basketball, so we can only evaluate this to a certain extent. We have to see you in live game action. So a lot of the time, the player that you might have saw at the end of last year may be a completely different player now, but you as a scout maybe won't know that till you get him out there on the court, and in live action if he can get some minutes. And so that's why I wouldn't be surprised if there's a sneaky good rookie this year that maybe we weren't expecting because of that. Because there's a couple of guys, that look really good this year. And so I just feel like the long layoff and then the bubble, between the bubble and now, like I said, you're going to see a bit of shakiness from a lot of the top teams to me. Teams aren't going to look as dominant. You're going to see teams struggle a lot early, but you can also you can see through the performances. Even John Wall, he's been off for 2 years. He looks great coming back for Houston. Like, you can tell players who have not been able to play definitely have worked on some things. Because I've always said, best ways to work on your game, even though you don't want to do it this way, is through injury. Because while you're rehabbing, trying to get strong, you can also work on things that you maybe weren't the best at before. And then, obviously, through a pandemic where you had to stop the season, now you can work on things that you weren't able to work on during a regular NBA season. Then let's say you have a playoff team that makes it deep into the playoffs, so now you won't have as much time as a team that's only in April to work on your game. So, because remember, you stop in April, you play again in October. You go to the finals, you stop in June, you play again in October. That's about a whole 2 months difference in terms of your game potentially being worked on. So that's why we're seeing a lot of players coming back from injuries, coming back, from the long layoff, playing some of their best basketball right now because of the time they've been allotted to get themselves back up and running. And now they're showing the fruits of their training during this young NBA season so far. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into Sabor NBA news right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, I discussed my thoughts on how I think the layoff for teams that did not play in the bubble has benefited these teams, as you're seeing in the performances of a couple of teams like the Hawks and the Cavaliers. Some of their young, budding star players are playing some of their best basketball, making tremendous growth in year 2 for a lot of these guys, year 3 for Colin Sexton. And then you also have teams, even between the bubble and now, you can see which ones kind of chilled, which ones kind of worked hard. You can see that's why some teams that we consider to be really good aren't maybe playing as well as we thought, like the Heat, like the Bucks, and other teams are. So it'll be interesting to see how this season again plays out. It's rapid, coming fast, a lot of back-to-back, 72-game season in a condensed schedule. It's going to be very interesting to see how everything looks and turns out. So we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on that moving forward throughout this NBA season. But now we're going to go ahead and get into some news. So apparently on Twitter, Marvin Bagley's dad, the former, I believe, second overall draft pick a couple years by Marvin Bagley, third, has requested that his son be traded. He basically said he believes his son, he's basically saying his son wants out of Sacramento. Now, Luke Walton responded to this and said that we don't worry about that. We don't pay attention to that. He basically is saying it's outside noise. Basically alluding that Marvin Bagley has not came to him or anybody within the Kings organization and said it, but his dad is saying it for him. And so, if this is true, listen, if you listen to me on this podcast, I have been critical of Luke Walton in the past because I believe there's too many players that are coming out having issues with the man, having issues with his coaching style, having issue with the way he's handling things. To me, that concerns me. If I'm a head guy of one of these franchises and I'm looking for a head coach, that Luke Walton, it seems like in LA, he butted heads with Lonzo Ball. That was the big story. Lonzo and him did not get along. Obviously, LeVar thought Luke wasn't doing his son any favors. Then you have, him coming to the Kings. And then remember last year, his issues with Buddy Hield. And he benched Buddy Hield after giving him the big contract. And Buddy Hield, we heard rumors he wanted out. And now we have Marvin Bagley's dad saying, well, my son wants out of Sacramento now. It's just, to me, that there's too many players coming out if it is true. Because, listen, we know all these players have lives. They have friends. They tell their thoughts, dude. They're probably like, oh, man, I kind of low-key want to leave because I just feel like this doesn't change. I want to go somewhere and play and another team that's going to give me an opportunity. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but the year Marvin Bagley was drafted, he actually wasn't by Luke Walton. It was by David Yeager. I don't know if y'all remember well, I'm sure y'all remember. It hasn't been that long. It's not like it's been 5 years ago. He was the former or the last head coach before Luke Walton. And remember that first year, Marvin Bagley didn't play a lot or didn't play as much as expected for a top 3 pick. And one of the reasons why David Yeager got fired was because of the fact that the basically ownership felt like, we drafted this guy, you're barely playing him, you're playing the veterans. And yes, the Kings almost made the playoffs that year. They were not happy about that. And so that was one of the reasons why they proceeded to let him go. Well, now you're hearing 2 years later with Luke Walton, Marvin Bagley has not had the NBA career that we thought he would be going to, or he would be. He's had some good moments, but he hasn't been what we thought would be of a top draft pick. And so I think what's happening right now is that, he's 3 years in, going into his 4th year coming up, and basically he may be essentially telling people within his family, I'm not getting the opportunity that I thought I would get here. And it's bothering him a little bit. But listen, we haven't heard it from his agent, and we haven't heard it from him. So, we can't necessarily go with that. I mean, remember, I'll give you an NFL example. Dak Prescott You were hearing from his brother over the offseason that he wanted out of Dallas because they didn't pay him. Even though Dak or his agent never said that. So sometimes, listen, maybe Dak may have mentioned, oh, since they don't want to pay me, maybe I should leave. But he maybe wasn't really trying to actually make a trade request or anything of that sort. It's just one of his family members took it and ran with it. That could be what's going on here. Maybe Bagley mentioned maybe if things don't change in Sacramento, he might want to leave. And so maybe his dad said, well, he clearly wants out, so I'm going to let everybody know my son wants out. It's a possibility. He could have did that. And so we'll have to see if that really has to do it. And then on top of that, his dad deleted the tweet. So sometimes when that happens, that usually means, okay, we're going to take it back sometimes. And like I said, Bagley, who was the second pick in the draft in 2018, only has 11 points, 8 rebounds this year. And he doesn't close out games. And then he was on the bench for the last 8:37 of their loss to Houston. And then when they played Houston the previous time, he didn't play the last 15 minutes. And then when they played against the Suns, he didn't play the last 3 minutes and 16 seconds of that game. So, I can maybe see what he means. Because one thing I think a lot of people still feel like is that Marvin Bagley has the potential to be better statistically than what he's been. He just hasn't been given the opportunity. And remember, this is the same situation with Lonzo. LeVar felt like he wasn't getting the opportunity to truly be himself, which kept him from being the best player he could be. Now you hear Marvin Bagley, people are feeling like maybe Luke not playing him late in games, opting for other players, not allowing him to really be himself in limited minutes. Maybe that's something we got to look into and think about. So we'll have to see what happens with Marvin Bagley Jr. the third throughout the year and see, does things change? Or will he maybe really, at the end of the day, request a trade? It's just something, because I'm sure a lot of people will love a young big man like Marvin Bagley to bring into their team and develop him, and he become what we thought he would have became as the second pick in the NBA draft. But now proceeding into this. So there's a team to me that I think has clearly taken a step back this year. It looks very obvious to me that they've taken a step back this year, and that's the Toronto Raptors. I think the Raptors, they didn't lose Kyle Lowry or Van Fleet or Siakam, you would think are the 3 best players. They didn't lose them. They did lose Marc Gasol and Ibaka. So they lost front court. And they've tried to replace that. But Toronto just doesn't look like they have the juice anymore. I feel like Siakam averaged 25 last year. I don't think Siakam's going to average 25 this year. And the thing is that, do we look at that as a bad thing? Because, well, you could say Toronto's team last year was better, but he averaged more points. Where now this year, you could say it's on him to kind of at least average around the same. Maybe he doesn't have to average 25, but maybe 22, 23. And it doesn't look like that up either. Because remember, at the end of last year, Siakam did not play well. In the bubble, he did not play well. He did not play like the Siakam we saw during the year, which got him in the most improved player of the year candidate position. And so there are some questions if he's really going to end up being the player they thought he could be. We know what Kyle Lowry is. We know Kyle Lowry is a dog. He going to play defense. He can make big shots. But we know Lowry also has his moments too where he struggles to hit a bucket and be effective on the offensive end. And in Van Fleet, I feel like is their most clutch player. I like to consider him the closer of the Toronto Raptors, a guy who closes out games, can hit the big shot. And he's played well, but there's just not that juice with this team. And so I think that, I'm really sitting here questioning if Toronto will be a playoff team. With the 7 through 10 play-in, I think they'll be in the range. So don't take it like I think they're going to be like one of the last 5 teams in the Eastern Conference. But I think you would look at Toronto and think they look like a team who could be a top 5 seed potentially. Because that's what they've been basically for the last almost half decade. A top team in the Eastern Conference. And this year may be the first year they may not be there. I mean, you got to think about it. We think Brooklyn's going to be up there. Philly, Boston, Milwaukee, that's 4. We think Indiana looks solid again with 5 All-Stars. They're going to be probably sitting up there. Atlanta looks really good. I'm thinking they're going to make the playoffs. Then the Magic look really good, so we have to say they're at this rate unless something happens. They're looking like they're going to make the playoffs. And then maybe you want to throw the Cavaliers in there, Miami Heat. Oh, I forgot the Miami Heat. Miami Heat, they look, I mean, they're struggling, but I think Miami Heat's still a playoff team. And so I've already named 8 teams. And then, like I said, you got the Magic in there. You know, then you have the Raptors. And so they may be potentially the 10th best team in the Eastern Conference this year. And that may seem crazy to say, but that really might be the case. Because they just don't have that punch that they had before. And Nick Nurse is a great head coach. He gets the most out of his guys. He always tries to get the most out of them. But it just doesn't look good. That's why they started the season 1-4. You know? And that's why I think people are saying, well, maybe they need to trade for James Harden, or maybe they need to trade for Bradley Beal. Because like I said, right now they don't look good. They don't look good. You know, and like I said, Siakam's struggling a lot right now. He looks like he doesn't know he's averaging 16 points a game this year. He doesn't look like he's the same. Van Fleet, like I said, he's been their best scorer really this season. Then Kyle Lowry, they've been pretty much, what they expect to be. Angie Anunoby's doing what he can, but if Toronto's going to turn this around, Siakam has to play better. Because if he doesn't, I just don't think they have enough offensive punch, and I think Toronto's going to actually struggle to score this season. And they're going to have to rely very heavily on their defense to keep them in games. Because at least, even with Ibaka and Gasol, you have that great defense, and then you could get enough from Gasol and Ibaka with Lowry, with Siakam giving you 25, with Van Fleet potentially having a big game. You could still have enough good games to get you over the hump. Where now you lose some of your defense, your scoring doesn't look as efficient. Now you're wondering if the Raptors are even going to be able to score enough points to win enough games. So Toronto definitely has some things to work on. It's only 5 games into the year for them, but they have to change some things, or else Toronto may be playing in that play-in tournament, or maybe even dangerously, potentially even missing that as well. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, I'm going to get into some net issues that I've noticed watching the Brooklyn Nets. Plus, I want to talk about 2 players who've been balling out so far to start this season. So stay tuned for that right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed multiple topics, like Marvin Bagley's dad in a deleted tweet saying that his son wants out of Sacramento. Walton saying that it's all outside noise, and Marvin Bagley III or his agent have yet to actually confirm or say they want a trade. I discussed my thoughts on that last segment and everything of the sort. I also discussed my concern for the Toronto Raptors as Siakam does not look like the player we saw last year. How they don't seem like they have the juice offensively, and how I think there's a chance Toronto could very well miss the playoffs this year and have a setback of a year if things do not change. Now, the season is still young, so I'm not saying it's a done deal, hands down guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. But I am aware that with these struggles, this may be the new reality for the Toronto Raptors and that fan base, especially with everything going on. So we all have to keep an eye on that. But I have another team that is also, I believe they're going to get their stuff together. They're too talented not to, but they do have some concerns that they do have to improve and change if they really want to be a legitimate contender by the time the playoffs roll around. And that is the Brooklyn Nets. You know, Brooklyn, we know Kyrie, KD, two of the best offensive players in the game. They can score. That's not an issue. But I think one thing we have to point out is that the loss of Spencer Dinwiddie is huge. Because now, the thing that made them dangerous to me was when KD and Kyrie came off the court, you would have to deal with Spencer Dinwiddie and Chris LeVert. Both guys could go off at any time. So you really had 4 professional scorers, plus Jeff Green, who's a really good veteran. They had some really good pieces. Joe Harris, who's an elite shooter. You know, they had some pretty good pieces. This team looked like they would be able to be one of the better offensive teams, because you knew you were probably going to get almost 30 a night from KD, 25, 30 a night from KD, almost 20, 25 a night from Kyrie. Either one of them could have big nights too. You had depth, you had shooting, you had, rebounding, shot blocks. You had all that. And now with Spencer Dinwiddie gone, you've lost some of that offensive firepower, which now you could even say puts more pressure on KD and Kyrie. And I watched both the games against the Atlanta Hawks and against the Washington Wizards, and honestly, that's what it looks like. Right now, the Nets are very much dependent on KD and Kyrie to score. If they're not scoring, they do seem like they struggle to sometimes in stretches get buckets. That's why you're definitely seeing Steve Nash try to stack their minutes. So it's always like one of them's on the court, so they never have that moment where, if we just only have Chris LeVert on the floor, they could just focus all their defensive pressure on him, shut him down, and then hope that somebody else on the court can, make something happen. And so clearly that's something I think if you're the Nets, you have to go into the trade deadline in a couple of months and think about. Who can we bring in to potentially replace Spencer Dinwiddie? Now, some people think Spencer Dinwiddie could be back maybe in the playoffs potentially. We don't know. We're going to go ahead and assume that he will not return, but they did say that he could be back. And so what the question is going to be who maybe would be a good fit to be the new point guard? So any team that maybe is looking to get rid of it. Don't forget something. We forget to start this season. The Los Angeles Clippers were rumored to be open to trading Lou Williams. Maybe that's a potential target for the Brooklyn Nets around the deadline to bring a guy in like a Spencer Dinwiddie who's a walking bucket and be able to get that offense back. Now, obviously, they're going to try to play through it, see what they have currently with their current roster, which they should. It's still early in the season, too, so you're not trying to make any major changes quickly. But these are issues that I've noticed with Brooklyn to start off. And another issue I've seen is their interior defense. If there's one thing the Atlanta Hawks killed Brooklyn on is in the interior defense. John Collins had his way against them. And you notice a lot, and the biggest thing the interior struggled with was on the defensive end. When they would come off pick and rolls, they wouldn't come up on screens, so they would leave the point guard wide open off the pick, and they were killed there. And also, we do have to bring up this question. And I've seen this from Nets beat writers and Nets, because listen, I watch everybody's NBA Twitter to see what they say about their teams. And a lot of people are saying that they feel like DeAndre Jordan right now is hurting the team. Yes, he's a rebounder. Yes, he can block shots. So that's not but it's just, he's a traditional center. So if you have any bit of athletic big, he's not really the best in terms of perimeter defense. He doesn't come out on guys. So if you have a bit of a jump shot, he's going to give you the chance to make it. And basically, the plus minus does not look good for DeAndre Jordan right now. They're in the negative right now when he is on the floor. So what we're seeing right now is that the Nets clearly have some issues they need to work on and change on this team. We're going to have to see if they can get that fixed. Like I said, it's only 7 games in for them. It's not something that you immediately have to go out of your way and change instantly. Because, it's the beginning of the season. You're still trying to get the chemistry down with everybody. You're still trying to play together. So there's no need to overreact, I'm sure. I'm sure they're just going to monitor the situation, see how things develop, see how Steve Nash works out certain lineups, see what he likes, and then see what ends up being the case. Another thing I've seen from Brooklyn Twitter, Jeff Green and Jarrett Allen, they feel like should get more minutes. So maybe if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan, look at that and say, is that something that you do see when you watch your team play? Do you agree with those players should get more minutes, and what do we think should happen moving forward? So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to look at right here. Because, like I said, Brooklyn has championship aspirations. So they're not trying to, have anything derail them from potentially being that championship contender. And we know with all championship contending teams, when the trade deadline does start to peek its head, they're going to be looking to make a big move to help, either shore up or improve a certain spot on their team. So that way they could be there at the end of the day and feel like we still have our complete team moving into the playoffs and we can compete and win. But that's what's happening with the Nets. Now I want to talk about 2 players who have been balling out and deserve credit. First, I want to talk about Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown has been balling this season. Everybody knows Jason Tatum is the star of the team. Everybody knows that, he's the face of Boston. I think we legitimately can sit here and say that. But we don't talk about what Jaylen Brown has done. Jaylen Brown has played extremely well these last few games. And with his performances, with what he has done, you have to sit here and say, has Jaylen Brown potentially taken that next step? Now, if you want to know what I'm talking about, in all of the games that he's played this season so far in the sample, in the 7 games he's played, he has 31, 25, 42, 20, 18, 27, and 33 points. He's balled out this year. Because, listen, we all looked at Jason Tatum and said, superstar. But Jaylen Brown could be an all-star. And there's nothing wrong with being an all-star player. But Jaylen Brown saying, I can be even better. Compare him to a lot of teams' second options. Would you rather have Jaylen Brown or Chris Middleton? I'd rather have Jaylen Brown. Would you rather have Jaylen Brown or Fred VanVleet? I'd rather have Jaylen Brown. Legitimately. Compare him to a lot of teams' second options. Who would you rather have, Jaylen Brown or that guy? Because he easily could be the best player on some teams in this league. If he went to Charlotte, I think he would be the best player on Charlotte. Not Gordon Hayward. I think people would sit here and say Jaylen Brown's a better player than Gordon Hayward. And so that duo in Boston with him and Tatum, they're the future. They're the lifeblood of Boston. That duo is the duo that has been assigned to bring them a championship. And if Jaylen Brown continues to play like this, and Tatum continues to play like he's playing, just like it's been the last 2 out of the last 3 years, I would not be surprised to see Brooklyn in the Eastern Conference Final. Competing, playing to get to the finals and break through. Because they have that type of talent at such a young age and still being one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. And then I also want to give a shout out to John Wall. John Wall coming back from an injury. It's been 2 years. And then he even had a delay to start this season because of COVID protocol. And then his 2 games against the Suns, he has balled out. First game, he had James and played well. This game, there was no James. Still balled out. You could definitely see that John Wall has worked on his game. And that, like I said, it goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. 2-year layoff, he wasn't just rehabbing the whole time. He knew, okay, let me try to improve some things about what I do. Because I'm sure John realized, listen, I've had 2 lower leg injuries. I may not be that guy I was when I came to the league, the fastest player in the NBA, people would say. So I got to be able to improve my jump shot. Be a more respectable 3-point shooter. Have a mid-range. Add more elements to my game. And then if by the time that time comes around, I still have my athleticism, it now just makes me an overall more dangerous player. That's why some people think James Harden may sit here and see what's happening with Christian Wood and everybody on the Houston Rockets and say, you know what? Maybe I should let this play out for another year and see how it goes. Because there's some talent on that team, and John Wall is showing people, hey, I'm still one of the better point guards in the NBA. Do not count me out yet. And you can clearly see it by the way he plays. So, John Wall and Jaylen Brown have been balling so far to start the season. I got to give my love to them, for doing what they've been doing. I only hope the best for both of them. I wish health for both of them. John Wall, we hope he remains healthy for the whole year. Jaylen Brown, we hope he stays healthy and continues that great duo in Boston and continues their success going into the season. And we're going to have to see what happens moving forward. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more basketball news here at the GSMC Basketball Podcast. So stay tuned right here.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed how I see some holes and some issues with the Nets, what they've been struggling with, needing to improve their interior defense. Plus also missing Spencer Dinwiddie. I think that's been pretty clear so far. But like I said, it's early in the season. Teams still learning to play together. So we'll have to see how everything comes out. And with Katie and Kyrie, they still have a chance in every game. So it's not the end of the world. But it does put more pressure on those two to be big time, to score, because they have lost that other weapon on the offensive end they did have in a Spencer Dinwiddie. We also discussed, gave some credit, some shout-outs to Jaylen Brown and John Wall, discussing how they've played very well for their teams. John Wall in just a couple of games has played extremely well. Coming back, really starting the season late, haven't played in 2 years. Now coming out here playing extremely well for the Houston Rockets. And then Jaylen Brown's been balling. I went through it last segment, all the points he scored in every game so far this season. He has been big in almost every game this season. So Clearly, both players whose trajectory is on the way up, and that's what we only hope for here is for careers to be maximized to the best of their potential. Before we get into this segment, I'd like to remind you guys, please do not forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball, where we interact, talk about everything basketball related there on GSMC Twitter. We on the highlights, big moments during the nights. Interact with us, give us your thoughts on certain things. We love to interact with you guys on GSMC Twitter. So it's just GSMC_basketball. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So I saw an interesting article last week, and it talked about the Raptors and how they should make a big trade. Now, I already discussed earlier in the show that I think the Raptors, right now, how they're currently constructed, may not be a playoff team. But if they want to be a playoff team, they can still maybe make one big move. That one big move would probably be surrounded around a James Harden. Now, we've seen Toronto do this 3 years ago with the Kawhi Leonard. They gave up a boatload of the picks and DeRozan and everybody to get Kawhi so they could win a championship, even though it was a one-year rental. James Harden, the thing about James Harden that I think we don't talk about in his situation is if he gets traded, it's not a one-year rental, unless he somehow complains a year later and wants another trade. But basically, you still have him under a contract for 2 to 3 years. So he's going to be there for a minute. And so maybe this is a trade that Toronto can look into doing. Now, obviously, you probably have to put Siakam in the trade. Probably OG Anunoby as well. And then either Lowry or Van Fleet, I would think you would probably also have to put into the trade. Now, and then you probably have to win some draft picks. Now, a lot of people have obviously spoken about the James Harden trade. And a lot of people think in a lot of the team situations of every team that's even called Houston about James Harden, a third team may have to still be included just so they can get the right amount of compensation without the team who's trading for James Harden giving up too much, and it feels like, well, yeah, we got James, but we don't have a lot after that. So Toronto is a potential team that could go down that road. That's something that has been discussed and thought about and talked about. And it's something that if I'm Toronto, I have to look into it. I do. Because Toronto's offense is struggling. They're going to struggle to score points this year. James Harden is a walking 30-point a game. So he's already averaging 12 more points if we go off just straight 30 points. 12 more points than what Siakam's averaging this year. You've already gotten all of Siakam's points plus 12. Because with Toronto's offense being as bad as it's been, I feel like clearly if Toronto wants to be a playoff team, they have to look into trying to improve their offense. So we'll have to see. I mean, maybe in the trade, potentially, they can maybe even get a PJ Tucker to add a shooter in there to also help with the offensive woes. Because that's also another thing that I think Toronto struggles with is they don't have a lot of shooting either right now. You know, outside of Lowry and Van Fleet, you know, Siakam's really not a great three-point shooter. OG Anunoby isn't really a great three-point shooter. So it's not like they have anybody that's a sharp shooter from three that could really do something. It's just a thought, and it's an idea. I think if you're the Raptors, you have to at least entertain. You know, because unless somehow they find better chemistry offensively, you got to get you a bucket, and I think trading for James Harden would be something you have to at least take a dive into, unless you just feel like what you're having to give up is too much. If you feel like what you're having to give up is too much, then it's understandable why you won't be too aggressive in that trade. But if you are willing to make it, because again, usually Toronto doesn't get big time free agents to come there, then maybe, they may be a trade partner that Houston can get into. And it kind of transitions into this topic for me. Why don't more NBA players go to cities like Toronto, Portland, considered great basketball cities, but not necessarily maybe the glam of a New York or Miami or LA? Now, Toronto's his own case, because Toronto is a very good city as far as I've heard from people. It's actually a great city. It's in Canada, so you're isolated from the U.S. Second, their taxes are super high up there in Canada. If you know anything about Canada, since they do have free healthcare and et cetera, taxes are very high. So if you're an NBA player, you're going to get your taxes more than anywhere else you would in the entire United States. So I'm sure a lot of players don't want to sign a big-time contract knowing, man, going to Toronto, I'm probably only going to get this much, where if I signed here, I would actually get maybe a couple more million than this. So that's also a reason why people don't want to go to Toronto. But we see some of these teams, these small market teams, great crowds, just fantastic crowds. And yet, players play in these arenas, and I know they feel the atmosphere. And I sometimes think, and it really takes me back to something with Miami. They say Miami is a good basketball city, but the thing is, it's Miami. There's other things to do than watch basketball in Miami. That's why they would say, if you ever notice Heat games, especially when LeBron was there, they would sell out, but it's not like a small market team like an Indiana or a Cleveland, where if there's a playoff game, you'll see everybody in their seats before the tip. Where in Miami, I remember, if you remember LeBron's time there, when he was in Miami, there would still be a lot of empty seats at the beginning of games, big playoff games. It would be filled up to maybe 95, 90% capacity, but there were still empty seats. And then you would still see people filing in. And it's just because, like they say, in Miami, there's other things to do. So unless the team is really good, you're not going to get that type of support from the fans. Same thing with LA. Except LA, to me, is a diehard basketball city where even if the Lakers aren't the best, they can still get very good fan support. Because you have a lot of diehard Laker fans. Miami, you'll if you're not a good team, a lot of people won't come to Miami Heat games like that. Even the New York Knicks. Knicks have great basketball fans, but their reasoning is more because they've been so bad for so long. So really, it's to a point where if the Knicks get good crowds, they're only coming to see the other team's star player come. Listen, living in Atlanta, I stayed, with Atlanta Hawks and their fans. We've never been considered a great basketball fan base. But the people in State Farm Arena know when a big player like LeBron or KD comes here, people are going to want to buy tickets, and they're going to want to go to the game to watch the Hawks, regardless if they're good or not. Because those are your attractions. But it's always great when you have your own team that you could just say, we have our own attraction. We have our own player that brings people here and makes them want to come and watch us. And so my point is, but Portland is considered a great city. They don't have a lot of, they actually have a very good nightclub life, and that's what a lot of NBA players like to do. So a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but a lot of things about it is that there's a lot of good things happening in Portland, but you don't really hear people say, I want to go to Portland. And then people say it's to a point where it feels like every star player wants to go to the same three cities: New York, California, or Miami. Texas isn't a bad place. Players want to go play with them in those areas, like Dallas and Houston. But it's not an overly top-of-the-world city. But listen, I understand Milwaukee, Cleveland, the city itself isn't that exciting. And obviously, if you're going to play for an NBA team, you want to make sure where you're living is entertaining, where it's like, well, when I'm not playing, what do I have to do? Now, I look at it like this. During the NBA season, you practice, you play. So there's a lot of time you're going to dedicate to your basketball life. So really more in terms of what the city has to offer has to do more with, to me, off season or if you have long layoffs. Not more than, peak season, I got to zero in. So I think players are eventually not everybody can go to those three major cities that I've talked about. And so eventually players are going to have to spread out a little bit. They're going to have to basically attempt to say, okay, what are other cities that are good cities but have good basketball? That's why I think a lot of small town teams or major markets try to establish good organizations, good front offices, where it's like, our city may not be New York and it may not be Miami, but we'll give you the best, we'll give you a great chance to win, and our city isn't that bad where you're like, wow, I hate it here. Like people talk about, again, living in Atlanta like I do. Atlanta, a lot of players look forward to playing here in Atlanta because of the city. Because Atlanta's a great city. Players look forward to this place. But why don't we get free agents? I'll put that more on the fact that Atlanta Hawks basketball history. It's never been an appealing basketball destination. It's not an appealing city destination where you'll hear teams or players talk about Milwaukee and Cleveland and say that's just not an appealing. It's not an appealing place to live, and I want an appealing place to live if I decide to go move teams and play basketball there. And also, they have bad weather and etc. So just a thought. Just a little random thought I wanted to put out there. Why don't more players consider these places, knowing it's easy to become the faces of these franchises? You're going to get the money, everything you would get with these big-time places. And on top of that, won't be overshadowed and etc. And you maybe even can make more of a mark in a history for yourself if you're able to get over the hump with one of those teams. But that's all the time we have here for the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being part of this show, listening to me, letting me be part of your day. Hey, guys, like I said, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball. And also, don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.